Hello, everybody. You're very welcome back to the Cult of Cantona, Ireland's Manchester, well, among others, one of Ireland's Manchester United podcasts. But we like to think one of the ones that you can turn on, enjoy, and there won't be so much fabrication and manipulation of facts. We like to say it as we see it on this show. My name is Paul Butler Lennox. We're really excited today to welcome on a host of a channel and a show and a respected journalist in the UK, football journalist of Stretford Paddock. Somebody who always, again, says it like he sees it. They have a huge viewership and listenership over in the UK, and somebody that we respect on our show over here, Mr. Jay Motty. How you doing?
I'm good, bro. It's good to come on here and chat to you guys. I respect what you guys are doing. That was a lovely intro, by the way. So
Thanks very
yeah,
much.
it's
Yeah,
nice.
I wrote that down beforehand and I practiced it for 6 hours. So how's it going? How's things? You're busy as always, I see.
Yeah. Like yourself, it's been a bit hectic the last week or so. But like everything, like it's just United, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like if United are winning, then everything's all right, and if they're not, it just gets a little bit frustrating. And from my point of view, the sort of the deflating thing in a minute is I can see what we're trying to do, but it's not quite happening for us. And I am worried. I am genuinely worried about the sort of the amount of pressure the manager's under and just where we're going, because it feels like already 6 games in or whatever we are into the season, we're sort of under this pressure and we're questioning the manager and we're wondering if he's the right man for the job and wondering what the season's going to look like and how we're going to end up, sort of in another battle just to get European football or whatever. And it's a shame because I had such high hopes going into the season. I still have decent hopes and expectations, but you have to be realistic as well. And if we're being brutally honest, it hasn't been a great start.
No, it hasn't. I mean, it really is a case of managing and tempering expectations. I mean, from my point of view, and we mentioned this last week. I mean, I don't know what people expect. Not like 90% of the fan base last season realistically said that we couldn't win the league this year. And like you said, United are box office week to week. I mean, if we're not winning, it's just everybody a tidal wave of ABU negative. Like even one of the other hosts of the show constantly brings up, particularly with some of the broadcasters, when other teams, not even particularly when they're playing well, but when they're, they seem to jump on every little chink in the armor of every scenario, of every break in the play. If somebody makes a save on an opposing team, they're the best goalkeeper in the world. When somebody, when somebody wins the ball back, United are playing terribly. I mean, like in general terms, is the weight of the cross of playing for Manchester United fundamentally the biggest problem that we have is the weight of being like, are we the New York Yankees of the Premiership, whereby we're just totally coasting on former glories? I mean, that what it is?
Maybe it is a little bit, to be honest with you. You have to sort of question why we keep having these cycles of a little bit of hope, a little bit of success in terms of cup competitions or league finishes, and then it's followed by an underwhelming season or a deflating season or the manager getting sacked. It does seem to be like this never-ending circle. Now, the one plus point we've got more recently is obviously INEOS have come in and they look like they know what they're doing in terms of a structure, in terms of a plan. They certainly care and know more about football than the Glazers ever did. So that gives you a little bit more hope and expectation. And I think, like they've said, and like we've seen with some of the signings, we know that it's not going to be instantaneous. You don't buy Lenny Yoro, Joshua Zirkzee, players like that, and expect to win the league title straight away. Those are players that, yes, they can do his job now, but they're more for the future as well. The sort of the disappointing part for me is, and maybe it is to do with what you said as well, like the weight of the shirt or whatever, is I think you can be a team that's going through a process and a club that's going through a bit of a transition and still challenge and still be relatively successful. We saw that in Eric Cantona first season. Last season in the FA Cup we saw it, although not in the league, obviously. The trouble you've got this season is some of the results just haven't been good enough. You look at the obviously the Brighton game, the Fulham, not the Fulham game, sorry, the Brighton game, the Palace game, and the Liverpool game, and even the FC20 game. Those are games on another day, other than the Liverpool game. I think all the other games you could have won. United could have won those games, and if it wasn't for one or two chances we didn't take or one or two decisions, whatever, it could have been differently. But it wasn't, and that's the issue you've got with Manchester United at the minute. We're just not getting the results that you need as Manchester United, and this is why I feel like Eric Ten Hag is under massive pressure going into the Spurs game, because for me, Spurs is the one game out of all of them where there are no excuses. You can't turn around after this game against Spurs at home and say, oh, well, Spurs are a good team. Don't often get a result against them. No, you should be beating Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, if Spurs turn up and play in any way Spursy, you'd expect us to beat them. So, so if they play in a Spursy way and we drop points against Spurs, or if we lose, like it's the first game, I was very worried when we drawed 20. I follow Dutch football and I have Dutch family on my sister's side, so I was concerned that that would be too close to home from. And I'm lucky we got any. I'm happy rather that we got anything from that match, because I was worried that if we lost that game, he'd get the bullet, because it's just too close to home. There's too much going on, and then like we have 5-6 matches that on any other given season, even under Ollie or Mourinho, you would imagine United to pick up, a good proportion of wins in those matches. If that doesn't happen based on the transfers that we've had and the money that's being spent, I don't think he has any. He's running out of road. I genuinely believe that there's just based, even looking at say Van Nistelrooy on the touchline the other night, there was hints of Ronaldo European Championship final 2016. Just very on the proximity. I mean, if ever there was a couple of images that sum up what's happening, looking like Van Nistelrooy is prepping and ready to go to step in if he gets the bullet. Do you think it's realistically he could get sacked over the weekend if we lose to Spurs? Really?
I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility at all.
Yeah.
I think the fact that INEOS interviewed other candidates, for me, doesn't smack of an ownership or a hierarchy that fully backed this manager. Now, they made the point where we looked at other candidates and we decided Eric Ten Hag was the best. So we stuck with him. But listen, we weren't interviewing other managers every year when Fergie was manager. We don't see Arsenal interviewing managers when they've got Arteta, or City looking at other managers whilst they've got Pep Guardiola.
Yeah, Jay, if someone was interviewing somebody for your job on the paddock, would you go back to work the following week?
Well, exactly. I'd be fuming, and we'd be having some serious conversations about that. In fact, they might have already done that, to be honest with you. But I think that with Eric Ten Hag, he was obviously. I think when you saw his interview, I think he did some commentary for Dutch football during the Euros, and he spoke about them coming to Ibiza, INEOS, and speaking to him and telling him that it was, they were giving him this contract extension, which was just the 1 year sort of predetermined deal. And he did seem a little bit miffed. He did seem a little bit sort of annoyed that it had gone down like that. I think he would have preferred it if they'd have come out and maybe given him a new deal, a proper new deal, or just backed him straight away without interviewing the likes of Thomas Tuchel and whoever else. So it's not great. So that sort of indicates to me that they're not fully behind him.
Yeah.
And also, when you add into that mix the fact that the results aren't great, and you've got Ruud van Nistelrooy there, as you've pointed out, who seems like someone who, at the very least, could be a caretaker boss if you needed him to, just to manage, man the fort until you bring in someone long term. I think the fans would stomach it, because even if you like Eric Ten Hag and you back Eric Ten Hag as I have, are people going to kick off if Ruud van Nistelrooy is the manager of Manchester United? Probably not, because we all love him because he's a club legend and he's also got a decent pedigree from what he did at PSV. You know Dutch football far better than I do. It's not like he's coming into this just as a former player. He's got experience as a manager as well. So there's that element. And also the fact that, yes, we won the FA Cup and it's fantastic, but we did finish 8th. There was a lot of bad results last season. So even, again, I keep repeating myself, but I have backed this manager and I think he's the right guy. But I've got a lot of mates who don't, or have lost faith in him, and I understand it, because you look at those games last season, he's Bournemouth, Fulham, Brighton, Palace, whatever. It wasn't good enough. I understand all that. So I think those elements are going to go against Eric Ten Hag. The way to silence all the critics, to move forward, to make your job secure, is to win games. And for me, that starts on Sunday. The Spurs game, yes, I can be negative and say if he loses, he can get sacked. I can also put it on a positive spin and say it's probably one of the best games you can have if you're trying to save your job. Spurs, who've got a terrible record, away from the White Hart Lane, or whatever it's called, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've won 3 of the last 15 away games. They're in a bit of a bad form anyway. The back end of last season, this season's been patchy at best. They play this high line that kind of suits you. It's not like they're a low block or whatever. They've got this sort of expansive way of playing that can make them vulnerable. So it's and like you said earlier, the Spursy. It's actually a term. It's a word we use. It's Spursy. You can use it in anything. Like, oh, that's very Spursy. So that says it all. So you've got this opportunity here of facing a team that is also, not only are they beatable, not only have they got a poor record away from home, not only do they play a way that should suit you, they're also a bit of a scalp. If you beat Spurs at home, the weird thing is about him, it's not like if you beat Fulham, where people go, oh yeah, it's only Fulham. If you beat Spurs, people go, all right, you beat Spurs. Good result, that. It's that weird, almost contradiction with Spurs, where they're very beatable, but you get credit for beating them.
Mm-hmm.
So it suits Eric Ten Hag and Manchester United, for me, this game, to have this game now where you can get a result against the top side and hopefully silence some of the detractors.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I've always been in the camp of Eric Ten Hag, and my family are, and the majority of my United fan mates are as well. And I do believe in him, but it is one of those things. I mean, if you do look at any of the other giant clubs in the world, would they put up with it? What we've put up with? And I know we're loyal, and that's what we're known for. That's what we're not as fans we're known for, and I love that about us. But when look, the reason why I think he has the potential to be sacked and he's more vulnerable now than he ever was is because I think that even though those the new signings, he identified or he was involved in, it was also upstairs that identified what they felt was weaknesses that we needed improving. So the club in general and the back room would feel as if those pieces are still in place, and we've got you all the parts for the car for it to run smoothly now. You're just not running the car correctly. And so for that reason, we might have to move you on. What like in general with INEOS, and all of us tend to stop talking about the Glazers as if they don't exist anymore. Like the boogeyman under the bed is no longer there, but they are. Do you think the Glazers have any hand in anything going forward? I know footballing matters, supposedly they don't, but how have INEOS done, and how do we get rid of that really small percentage of Glazer, that smell of Glazer, that residue of Glazer? They're not going anywhere, are they?
Doesn't seem like any time immediately they're going anywhere, and they're still, obviously, the owner, I think, is it 2/3 or whatever, or 3/4, so they still own a big chunk of it, but it does feel as though there is a longer term plan for INEOS to take more control. I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe, he hasn't come in just to play second fiddle to the Glazers. He hasn't come in to just own a little bit of United. He obviously wants to own all of Manchester United through INEOS. And it's kind of telling that he's been given all this power, despite the fact he's a minority, the INEOS own less of the club than the Glazers do collectively. It's INEOS calling the shots. It's INEOS making the appointments. It's INEOS not just looking at first we were told it would be the football side of things, but then we got told actually it's everything. It's even the commercial side of things INEOS are taking control over. And from what I've heard as well from a lot of journalists that we chat to on Stretford Paddock is that the Glazers are actually all right with this. Yeah. Because the Glazers are actually seeing a bit more revenue coming in or whatever. I know they're not getting the dividends, but they're like, you know what? He's dealing with everything. He's making the club more money. It's fine. He's doing things that we aren't capable of doing. And it's probably the first time the Glazers have actually shown a bit of self-awareness. That doesn't excuse anything of what they've done to this football club. But they seem to know that they're better off just leaving Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS to do what they're doing. Because would the Glazers have bought in Omar Barada? No, even though they said they were going to. You remember that statement, that absolutely insane statement that was released? And it was like, I think it was Joel or Avram Glazer and Sir Jim Ratcliffe both agreed that they wanted to get Omar Barada. It was a joint decision. Shut up. There's no way on God's green earth they were thinking about that before Sir Jim Ratcliffe came in. Dan Ashworth is obviously an INEOS appointment. Jason Wilcox is obviously an INEOS appointment. The structure that's been put in place is down to INEOS. Mm-hmm. Some of the signings that we're making, long-term signings, you feel like, including with the academy, the likes of Obi Martin, the likes of Sekakone, coming in. Is it James Over, the other kid as well? Like, we brought in these youngsters. that feels very much like INEOS taking control of the academy. So the Glazers are obviously happy to let INEOS do the things they need to do. INEOS are going to want to do that anyway. Otherwise, I don't think this deal would have been made. If the Glazers would have said, "Oh yeah, you can have a bit of the club, but we're going to call the shots," Jim Ratcliffe would have walked away. So I think long
Yeah,
term,
I mean, looking back
question,
to
I do see them
sorry to
getting
cut
the
across
prize.
you. Looking back at what Jim said in his interview a couple of months ago. I mean, he did say that it's going to take time. I mean, if the business people are saying that, you know, surely as it's up to us as fans, as a collective fan base of decent fans, to acknowledge that and go, it doesn't really matter who's in charge. It's the, you know, the 12th man. If the 12th man turns on the team, it's only going to slow things down. So is it a case of having to suffer the ignominy of the Liverpool result? Is it a case of just tempering expectations and going, look, the best chance that we probably have of getting into the Champions League is winning the Europa League, and that should be good enough for us, as opposed to when we won it in 2017. When, to be honest with you, as United fans, were spoiled, and at the time I was like interested, but nowhere near as interested as I would have been in other cups that we've won over the years. That's where we're at. Should be an acceptance of that to some degree, based on basic, you know, best business dealings in commerce. It's not going to happen that way. You don't expect results immediately in any other business, large scale multinational business like that overnight. It takes a year, 2 years. Now, although it's the third year of Eric in his tenure, it's only the first year of INEOS. So are we at the tail end of like a 5 or a 6 year project before we see a Premier League? And we just have to take what we're given, keep our trap shut, and get on with things, and hope that we win another FA Cup and a Europa League, and maybe scrape into the Champions League this year, and that should be good enough for us.
I think you can temper your expectations in terms of when we're going to see a Premier League, which I think Omar Barada has come out and said he expects it to
2028,
be
didn't he?
2028, which seems relatively realistic. But I think you can also expect to see a gradual improvement during that time. You can expect to see signs that we're moving in the right direction. The
Mm.
Liverpool game was difficult because we started off quite well, but then to lose in the manner we did at home, so you face these rivals, it's difficult to take that one. The Palace draw was a bit annoying, but I thought we played well.
Agreed. Yeah.
FC20 is annoying because I know you obviously know far more about Dutch football than I do, and you said there earlier, you're not that dismayed by a draw, but I felt that the way we were sort of in control of that game and then let it slip was frustrating to me. It really was, especially the nature of their equaliser, where you saw basically so many opportunities to clear that, to get rid of that, to deal with it before it became a goal. So it is a little bit annoying. But my concern isn't me as a fan just getting frustrated or annoyed with some of the results. My concern, as someone who has backed Eric Ten is that INEOS, who've already shown they're not 100% sold on him, might look at it and go, is this the right guy? If results, I'm not talking about, obviously, if he wins, he's fine. But if results keep going against him, would they pull the plug? And that, for me, might be a mistake.
Mm. I'll just very quickly just talk or mention some of the transfers that have come in, and who looks, from your perspective, who looks the real deal. I know it's still very early to say, but I mean, for me anyway, Ugarte seems to be what we want him to be, in a very kind of Michael Carrick-esque, going about his business. Not that he's a similar player, but that kind of underrated, doing simple things well. Getting the ball, tracking back, doing the simple things well. Ugarte seems to be really good. Xerxes gone a bit quiet for me. Who looks the real deal for you, and who do you think may not be on the money just yet?
I think it's difficult to make a judgment on some of the players. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
For me, it's too soon for you, guy. I get your point, but I'm going to reserve judgment until I've seen a little bit more of him. I didn't see a lot of him at PSG, so I can't go off what I've already seen because I didn't see enough of it.
Yeah.
And so far, I think it's been a bit difficult to judge just by the level of opposition and by judging some of the minutes he's had. I'd like to see a little bit more before I can say for definite whether I think he's exactly what we need. One player I don't need any time with is Nusayr Mazraoui. I think he's phenomenal. And I loved Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and I was gutted when we sold Aaron Wan-Bissaka. I really was. But Mazraoui has filled Wan-Bissaka shaped hole in my heart and then some, because he's been brilliant. He
Yeah.
looks confident on the ball. His reading of the game is phenomenal. He can go past players. His energy and his engine is unreal as well. I mean, he reminds me a little bit of Evra, the way he can get forward. He just
Yeah.
does, and he's got that ability of that sort of modern fullback that you want to see. And I'm pleasantly surprised, because when you look at it, you go, okay, what was it, 13, 14 million for the 26-year-old? That's a bit weird. Why are Bayern Munich letting him go? Maybe he's not that great, and maybe it is the injuries that have sort of helps him helps his price become so low. But he's been unreal. I think every game he's played in, from that Fulham game when he made his debut, I think he trained once before with the squad before he played, to the more recent game against FC20. I think he's been a breath of fresh air. And I'd also say something similar, not quite as emphatic, but I think De Ligt's been quite good as well.
Agreed.
So those two in particular have impressed. I think with the others, I'm willing to be patient, because historically, if you look at some of the better players for Manchester United, I mentioned Patrice Evra. You remember his debut against City.
Yeah, him and Vidic. The first couple of weeks, there was big question marks about both of them in 06.
Yeah, we were thinking. I remember thinking, how's this guy got to a Champions League final when I saw Evra? He's, what's going on there?
Yeah, sometimes it can mean too much to them as well, which is, again, it's that albatross, sometimes.
Yeah.
It's whether or not they
interesting
have the
because
character. But absolutely, the Mazraoui thing, absolutely agree with you. He's, number one, the coolness in which he dealt with that question about playing for Munich and United, and United being a bigger club, arguably in the world, and that he understands what that means. And I think that's might be on some level the difference between De Ligt and Mazraoui coming in and the other players, insofar as, like, when you're coming from a Bologna, for example, Xerxes to United, or one or two of the other players, even PSG, it's a huge step up. So psychologically as well, for De Ligt and Mazraoui, Mazraoui, we have this every week in the show. I believe that they believe that it's where they're supposed to be, and they can handle it. They can handle that amount of pressure. They understand what it means, and they're quality players, especially De Ligt. Like, I wanted to ask you in general about De Ligt, and just about Eric's unnecessary rotation at this point in the season. Why is he not starting with his best back four, which is very clear for everyone at this point in time?
It's a good question. I think you might look at it and go, okay, De Ligt has had injury issues in the past, and Bayern Munich at one point, there's this myth that Eric Dyer was keeping Matthijs de Ligt out of the Bayern Munich side, and we all know that's not true. Anyone that knows anything about that team and what was going on knows that's not true. What happened with Matthijs de Ligt is he was kind of rushed back from injury by Bayern Munich, and then they took a step back with him and said, hang on a minute, we need to be careful here. So when he was fully fit and available, he played. But there was times when he was sort of not quite match fit that he didn't play, and then people are misconstruing that as he got dropped. He didn't. Now, I wonder whether that has not tempered expectation, but whether that is playing a little bit into Ten Hag's mind. And also, I will say, I still feel that someone like Harry Maguire should be able, I don't know, he didn't cover himself in glory for that 20 goal, but he should be able to start against FC20.
Yeah.
This is a player who, when he's fit, plays for England. This is a player who cost 80 million quid for a reason. This is a player he's played over 200 times for Manchester United. This isn't, someone who's 17 years old. This is an experienced, seasoned defender who's played at the top level for many years. He should be able to play in the Europa League. He should be able to play against most Premier League opposition, if not all of them. You should be able to give Matthijs de Ligt a bit of a rest if you're going to pick him in every single Premier League game, which I think he will moving forward. So I'm not too miffed about him resting De Ligt. I think it probably did cost us. I'm a little bit annoyed that it didn't work out, because I think, to be honest with you, when I saw that team on Wednesday, I'd be lying if I said I was questioning it. I looked at that team that Manchester United picked, or that Eric Cantona picked, sorry.
That's a strong enough team. That's a good enough team to beat. Yeah,
You look at that defence and you go, Mazraoui, Delo, Martinez, Maguire, with Onana obviously in goal. That back five, solid. No dramas there. The midfield, what was it? Ugarte, Bruno, and Ericsson. There's a bit of everything in that midfield.
yeah.
Not an issue. You look at the front three, was it Diallo, Rashford, Xerxes? That's a strong 11.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have an excuse. This is the thing. This is the whole point of the transfers that we've brought in, is that we've covered in every position now. That's the
Yeah.
point. The
Yeah.
point is that we should be turning over teams that are not
Yeah.
top four teams in every league in Europe. Should be every match. The issue that I have is the unpredictability of his rotations and his substitutions. Now, it seems to be that he was very concerned. He's very concerned about rushing people back because he doesn't want them to get injured, and he's leaving people out. Obviously, like you said, maybe Delict just, the kid gloves are on a little bit, just keeping an eye on him. But the reality is that Fergie at his best would always start with his best team for big games. He always would. And then if there's a bit of a cushion and there's two or three goal leads, he's taking that on board, and then he'll start to rotate players that way. This Benitez school of rotation nonsense is not for me. Start with your best team, and then you can start rotating players which are of lesser importance, depending on how well they're playing, pending the competition. And I admire his loyalty as well. It's a big thing with Eric, which is what I admire about him. I admire to a degree his loyalty with Rashi over the last year. I admire that. I do. But it's a results game. I admire his loyalty to Bruno over the last couple of games, but nobody, including the captain of the club, should be safe if they're not playing well. Like, Bruno didn't play well, and he hasn't played well for 2 or 3 games. Maybe he's tired. He was at the Euros. Could be carrying something, you don't know. But why? Why should Rashford and Bruno both immediately get a starting place based on reputation and loyalty alone?
I think if we answer sort of them separately, with Rashford, we know, and I spoke to Ryan Hopper. He did extra training during the international break. He's worked on his game. He's trying to improve. He's held his hands up and says he needs to improve. When you do that, you're almost admitting that everything's not been right. And I think,
Yeah.
to be fair to him, he came back in that Southampton game, got a goal, did well. Barnsley, okay, it's only Barnsley, but again, you can only beat what's in front of you. He got 2 goals, and fair play to him there. Then he's dropped, so he is rotated because he's dropped for the Palace game, which I wouldn't have done, because then you've got a player that's actually showing a bit of form. And I think Masha plays better when he's scoring goals. We saw it 2 seasons ago. When he's scoring and you keep playing him, he keeps scoring. When you take him out, he tends to sort of, he's starting all over again. So I think with that one, he actually has shown a bit. It's been a bit of a mixed bag with Rashford.
Yeah.
There's maybe a little bit of backing him, and then a little bit of, actually, I'm going to start going that show.
It's a
In a
confidence
Premier
game.
League game.
It's a confidence game. He's confident, and then he drops him or he rests him. What's that about?
Which that was a bit muddled. And then in terms of Bruno, you made a good point about the amount of minutes. I don't understand why people ignore this about Bruno. The amount of games and minutes he's played. It's ridiculous. If you look over the last 2 seasons, whatever it is, I think Bruno Fernandes has genuinely played more minutes than basically any other player in the world. He's right up there, because he's never injured. I think he missed 2 games last season, which is the first time he's missed 2 games in injury since he's been at United, which is ridiculous. He's been here since, what was it? He's been here for about 4 years. He plays almost every minute for Portugal.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, when Roberto Martinez took him off for Portugal in the Euros, it probably cost them the game. He also, as well, when he starts Manchester United, which I've just said is every game, he tends to finish the game. He doesn't get subbed very often.
Yeah.
And also, just to add another caveat to all this, United get far in the cups. United have gotten to semi-finals, to finals consistently. Going back before even Eric Ten Hag was here. We did it under Ole when Bruno was here. We've done it under Eric Ten Hag. We're a team that gets to the final of the Carabao, the final of the FA Cup. Twice we've got to the final of the FA Cup. We've been to the final of the Carabao, the quarterfinals of the Europa League last season, was it, or the season before? Like, he's in the latter stages of all these competitions, so he's constantly playing, and he's playing a lot of minutes. He might need a rest. He might just need a bit of a breather, because no player in world football, I think, has played, or not, or very few outfield players certainly, have played more minutes than Bruno Fernandes. We heard the other day, Rodri, I think it was, talking
Yeah.
about the amount of games that players have to play and whether they're even considering going on strike.
Yeah.
And that you've got a player who's just turned 30, he's still young. I'm not saying he's past it. He's just turned 30 and he's played more minutes than anyone. And yet people don't consider that with Bruno. I know you have, but a lot of people don't consider it and don't consider the amount of games he's played and said, actually, might this guy just need a breather?
Yeah.
Because he's constantly playing for club and country.
And he's constantly playing to a really high level, And
Yeah.
that's the thing with him as well, which frustrates a lot of fans. But I'm absolutely a Bruno fan, and I always have been. Bruno at his worst is still a 6 or 7. The other night maybe it was a little bit below his own standards, but when you're looking at a player like Bruno, you, no one can play that amount of football without the boat running aground eventually. It doesn't matter. There's mental fatigue. There's lots of things going on. Like, but the question is when he steps out, and that's the issue with him as well, is because he cares too much. It's the same thing with Rashford and that kind of psychology as well about caring too much, but it works in two different ways with both of them, in my opinion. Obviously, Rashford's head is not right. He could be having some anxiety, or he might have an anxiety disorder. You don't know what's going on with him. Webby said on our show a couple of weeks ago, his head's not right since he broke up with his missus, and he needs a good woman in his corner. And he would, wouldn't he? But these are the considerations that people don't talk about, and I would prefer, fans are not stupid. They're not silly. So there's been elements with Ten Hag recently where he's just not telling the truth, and he's starting to lie in pressers, and people are not stupid, and they know this is the type of stuff that Klopp started towards the end of his reign at Liverpool. Tell people exactly what's going on to a degree. Defend the players, absolutely. But if that's what's going on with Bruno, say Bruno's fatigued, he's mentally fatigued because he plays so many games. Say that you're having issues with whatever is going on. If someone's not confident right now, say that. Don't lie in pressers. The last couple of pressers he's coming in and he's been very defensive. He's attacking journalists. I admire the Fergie school of motoring where you'd go, right, that siege mentality. It's us against them, but the audience is a little bit more intelligent now. So they need to be, especially young fans, are encyclopedias of football now. They really are. They study the stats, they study the leagues, they study all the journos. They obviously follow channels like yours, etc. So they know a lot more about it. I just think being honest about these things is more important. Just about one or two quick questions for you, just before I let you go. Just about Old Trafford in general. I'm a fan. You're a fan. We all love Old Trafford. People's ashes are spread there. We know what it means. And the idea of keeping it on as a museum or a sentiment, like a sentiment, an afterthought sentiment, which is what it is. The idea of keeping it in its own structure or its own form and detailing it in some capacity. But where do you stand on that? Is it Old Trafford or Trafford Park that they're talking about potentially, or naming it something else? Where are you with that? Where do you stand with that? What do you want to see? What do you not want to see, more importantly?
Listen, I get the sentimentality towards Old Trafford, and I've got it myself. Some of the best moments of my life have been in that stadium. And I've been going since I was 5. I've been going there for 39 years, almost 40 years. So I understand it, but you've got to be a little bit more realistic. This is a stadium that's over 100 years old. It's a stadium that's got bits of concrete falling on people's heads. There's leaks in the roof constantly. If you try and sit down at Old Trafford, sometimes at our time I'll try and sit down and you can't. And I'm not even that tall. I'm barely, I'm just under 6 foot, and my legs get squashed. It needs more than just revamping. You can't keep revamping this stadium every few years and just trying to fix it and just bodging it together. And I think if we are going to move forward, if we are going to be the club that we want to be, and that is the biggest club certainly the biggest club in England, one of the biggest clubs in the world, then we need a stadium that's fit for purpose. And I think that means a new stadium. We've got an opportunity here now as well to have a new stadium. That might not happen in the future. You might say no, and then in a few years' time, you don't have the chance to do this. You've got that opportunity now. Listen, we've all been to grounds and stadiums, new stadiums of big clubs. Your history comes with you. You'll always be Manchester United. You'll always be one of the greatest clubs ever. You'll always have that history of the Busby Babes, of Charlton, Best and Law, of the Class of 92 and all that stuff. It's not going to leave you. And obviously you can take certain parts of the stadium, the Munich clock, the statues, and make that part of the new stadium. But I think we have to be realistic on just how feasible it is to keep revamping Old Trafford. And whilst we've all got that emotional attachment to the ground, and I have too, I think a new stadium makes more sense. A stadium that's fit for purpose, a stadium that can have 100,000 fans in there week in, week out, can still have those sort of memories that you've got, or the parts that build towards those memories of the old stadium as well. But you're moving with the times, and I think that's what Manchester United need to do.
Yeah, a good proposition that someone made that I was reading during the week was turning the Old Trafford into, for all intents and purposes, a media centre, like they have in LA. You've probably seen these massive kind of sphere-esque screens where people have another option to be very close to the action, close to the match in a new stadium. So in theory, they retain, 2/3 of the stadium, and an end, or the Stretford end, turns into a sphere-like screen where, another 30,000 people can watch the match for, a fraction, 10 or £10, where they can get in and watch the game. That's maybe something where you still have the picture, you still have the idea. In the same way Arsenal retained a lot of the stadium, or parts of the stadium in Highbury, in that estate and stuff, or in the housing complex, the apartment complex. The idea of retaining it in that way, where it's still a match-going experience, I think is interesting, where it becomes ultimately the stadium tour, or a kind of new 3D environment, entertainment center. That's interesting, I think. Just one or two quick questions from people that listen to our show, if you don't mind, before you go.
No, it's fine.
Just about the atmosphere in Old Trafford. This is coming in from Sean. Being in with the travelling United fans more recently against Southampton was amazing, and a more enjoyable experience than a lot of Old Trafford visits that I've had. He said, but he's never had a ticket for the Stretford end, based on availability of tickets, and of course, the result didn't help. Would be great to spread the signing ethos right through the ground, turn it into a fortress to intimidate away teams and lift the United team, etc. Demand from them. Nobody seems to be sitting on their own, etc. Blah blah blah. How can we improve the atmosphere? Can we, for example, this is what he suggests, send out QR codes so the whole stadium know all the fucking songs for a start, where there's a playlist or something, that type of thing. What can we do to get the Prawn Sandwich Brigade singing, basically, I suppose, in a nutshell, is what Sean is asking.
Listen, I appreciate any suggestions. Of a fair play to people that are trying to come up with something. I'd be a bit wary, I think, if putting on QR codes and people on the phones reading lyrics or whatever. I know you could always try and learn it and then come into the stadium, but I think that you'd end up with people just looking at the phones and trying to sing, and it just look ridiculous, and I don't think that'd work. But I think they've tried different things, haven't they? There's a singing section, there's a TRA that I've been part of it just as a member in the past. I think that helps. I think you can have designated areas which you can sort of have like little singing parts where you try and encourage younger fans in particular of a certain age to try and sit in certain sections. I think there's ways, in fact, you can maybe make tickets more accessible to certain fans who are willing to sing. It's tough because I think the club have tried a lot of these methods, and I think the atmosphere has improved. They did it with
the cup finals, giving out free scarves and all of this type thing, and trying to.
Yeah, I mean, my bucket out in the cup final for the one we lost to City got through after 10 seconds or whatever it was when Gundogan scored. I don't know how effective those methods can be, but I just feel like you've got to just sort of almost try having a little bit more of what you've been doing, really. Having a singing section, working with the club, working with the fans, trying to have these sort of designated areas. Maybe you try a little bit more of that and say, okay, we'll expand those sections to more fans, and maybe we can put a bit of a offer a bit of a discount on certain sections as well. So it's not going to be all seat. You know, I know you've got places now that there's a bit more safe standing. So maybe that can pay the way. I do think Old Trafford on its day can still have a fantastic atmosphere. You go back to that Liverpool game last season, the 4-3. The atmosphere for that game was a throwback, wasn't it? It was unreal. So you don't be too dismissive of the atmosphere at Old Trafford. It is a difficult one, though. But yeah, I think the club are trying to work with fans, and I don't always give United credit, but I think they have made a little bit of an effort.
With the new membership thing with the app as well. What it's doing is it's weeding out the touts, but it's for people that have to put their money where their mouth is and become a member, they want to be there. So I suppose that's going in some way. I know it's like creating extra revenue for the club, but the cynics won't pay the extra 20, 30, 50 pounds for the membership, So it's keeping people that are fair weather fans away, which is a good thing. Just one last question for you, and I'll let you go. Two, one short one and one really short one. This is from Deck. Could you ask him what does he think of the disconnect between the majority of modern day footballers and the fans? Too many videos of players leaving the ground after the game, not acknowledging the people who've dropped so much money to go to games in what is for some people a once in a lifetime opportunity.
It's weird, isn't it? Because we was talking on a podcast earlier with Steve about days when we used to go to the cliff and meet the players and get things signed and get photos and all the accessibility you got, all the access you got. You'd be stood in the car park with, the likes of Brian Robson and Roy Keane and just chatting to them. It was crazy. Now, obviously, it's different at Carrington where it's just players driving past and some of them will stop and some of them won't. But the sort of the flip side to that is you do have, sometimes you get better access now online because you've got Instagram, you've got sort of social media where there are players who are visible on that, and sometimes they will do sort of Instagram lives where you can chat to them or whatever, where obviously back in the day you didn't have that. I think it is sad though when players don't appreciate the fans. I think all players should understand that fans, whether you go to the game or not, you're making an effort, you're supporting them, you're getting behind the club, mostly anyway, and behind the team. You love the club and the team, and you're a part of what makes Manchester United so great. And I think the players need to show an appreciation of that. And I don't think there's any excuse really for when players, especially after the game, when you've got fans queuing, they just ignore them. I don't like that. I don't like to see that. My daughters and my son have been there outside Old Trafford after the game or whatever, or before the game to meet players. And there's been, some players are really good at it, some players that don't bother. And I think that's a shame. And I just think that players have paid a lot of money. And don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with that. You pay talented players for what they can do, but I think they should appreciate the fans that made that possible.
Absolutely. They probably think that some of the work that they do through foundations and all this type of obligations that they have, fits that obligation somewhat. So you can understand that to a degree, but you hear stories of some of the older players staying for hours, etc. And I know some do, and Bruno's very good like that, etc. But just to wrap up, Eric Cantona, what does he mean to you?
What does Eric Cantona mean to me? Can you see that? That's my screensaver on my phone. The thing is as well, like, you skip when you go onto it. Behind that one is my family. That's my next one. So he gets in ahead of them.
He gets priority over your kids.
Yeah, and I think my family understand that. I got to meet him when that photo was taken, and
yeah,
it's the most nervous I think I've ever been around another human being. I was absolutely in awe of him. Eric Cantona is a bit similar to Alex Ferguson, in the sense that he just made my life immeasurably better from 1992 onwards. He made Manchester United one of the best clubs in the country to the best club in the country consistently. He was the catalyst for those 13 titles, those Champions Leagues. We wouldn't have won those 2 Champions Leagues and all those titles if we hadn't signed Eric Cantona, because he's the one that kickstarted it all, from going from a good club or a good team to a great one. And he just had the aura that no other footballer before or since, certainly I've never seen, has had. He's more than a footballer, isn't he? As he said, he's Cantona. And I just feel incredibly blessed and lucky that I got to see him play for Manchester United. I really do. He's just a once in a lifetime player, and he was great. And I wouldn't change a single thing about him. Even that night at Selhurst Park. I know it probably cost us the double, but that was what made him so amazing. He didn't take any stick from anyone. He was one of a kind, and he was one of the greatest footballers there's ever been.
Yeah, mythical. I mean, very rarely when I was a kid, I never really understood. For me, I never really understood when my dad talked about George Best. I didn't get it, but I get it now.
Yeah.
That's all I can say about it. Jay, thanks a million for your time. Thanks for stopping in. I know you've had a long day and spending a bit of time with us.
No, I
Really
enjoyed it, man.
appreciate
It's
it.
been good. It's been good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, and we'll do it again.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you back. Thanks so much. Continued success. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll talk again, I'm sure, in the future. Have a great
100%.
day.
Yeah. Keep up the good work.
See you, man. All the best.